Welcome to Martial Wisdom. Here you can listen to conversations on all kinds of topics related to martial arts. The topic for today's show is the unsolvable training problem, which is how to train for 100% realism and intensity. Before we start, please consider supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Spirit Aikido online program, which currently contains more than 190 videos. Another option is to contribute any amount you like through the PayPal tip jar. Even small contributions are greatly appreciated. I hope you enjoy this episode. Now, on with the discussion. All right. I want to welcome Sensei Stephen Scott back to the podcast. We got a great discussion today. In fact, I think this is one of the ones I've been looking forward to the most very recently. So the topic is going to be the ultimate or the unsolvable training problem, about how can we train for realism without hurting one another in training, that 100% intensity and risk that's needed. So welcome, Stephen. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Hi, Tristan. Thank you for having me again. Pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, I guess where we can start is how most people view training for 100% reality. And the first thing I think that's important to acknowledge is there are no soldiers or fighters, professional or amateur fighters, that train 100% with eye gouging, biting, kicking to the nuts, twisting and ripping limbs. That is not a possible way to train. Even Marines, Army, military, they don't train with live rounds, live grenades, real bayonets. They don't do that. They run into the same problem that all martial artists or martial combatants face, is how do you train for that? So I wanted to get maybe some of your initial thoughts on it and your experience.
I think you're absolutely right, Tristan. I think you're absolutely spot on the ball with that, because when people define reality, when people look at martial arts and that type of training or any form of martial training, and what they are trying to say is that won't work in reality, that won't work on the street. What they mean is that won't work in their preconceived notion of what reality on any given street is going to be like. And invariably, I find the ones that are saying that themselves are actually quite insecure in themselves about what they're doing, and seeing something like Aikido just helps bring out that insecurity, because Aikido, as you've pointed out, is a technical martial art at its core, but it doesn't mean we can't train for reality. But let's just look at reality for a minute. When we think of, and when people talk to me about, what you're doing won't work in real life, I come back to them and say, well, what is real life to you? And they'll give me an answer. And the answers are as varied as everything else, but it comes down to somebody trying to either bash your head off a wall or stab you or do something. At which point I come back to them and say, right, okay, now let's look at this, how you do train for those real situations. And I like to bring it back to people, and I'd like to come back to this question later, which is what makes those who decide what reality is for a real situation, what do they perceive as the best training for that? And everyone usually comes back to, it's something like mixed martial arts, which is real. So I'd like to pocket that for a minute, and we'll come back to that later. Because the question I usually throw at them is how do you define reality in any given situation? There are so many variable factors that come into play whenever we try to engage with reality. We have to look at the environment we're training in. We have to look at the time of day this is happening. Is it you walk straight out of your work, you walk straight out of school, you're going into a building, you're coming out, you've not got no control over that aspect. You have to look at who it is you're going to be facing. You have to look at why you're going to be in a real situation in the first place. You have to look at the motive behind why this real situation has happened. I.e., is it someone looking for money? Is it someone looking for jewelry? Is it something who's just out for their jollies? You have to look at factors to do with yourself. Are you physically fit and capable on that particular day, at that particular time, to take action? Are you with someone else? Will your actions put them in danger? Are you picking your kids up from school and someone asks for your wallet? Are you going to take action? That's reality. You have to look at the rules of engagement that are taking place here, which are usually not agreed, unlike other scenarios. So when the rules of engagement start kicking in, where do you draw the line? Who's going to stop this if it gets too bad in a real situation, as opposed to a dojo or a sports situation? We have to look at factors such as the extended engagement contact, i.e. the weapons that may be brought to bear. If you're standing there with your car keys and someone's pointing a gun at you, that's pretty real. So what are you going to do? You know, or if you happen to have a fold-out knife in your back pocket and someone pulls a bowie on you, what are you going to do? Do you feel confident about that? Is that your sense of reality? You know, and very often when it comes to this and you start pointing out all these factors, these are all different aspects. If you cannot control 90% of those factors, you're in the wrong place for a fight or for any type of engagement. Therefore, you need to understand what it means to be working in a system of reality. And that's us not even talking about the engagement with the environment, the stability of where you're going, the weather conditions, you know, anything like that. We're not even looking at that yet. So when they define reality, most people have it in their mind that, you know, just as we're about to drift off to sleep, most martial artists will run a wee scenario in their head. Sometimes it does happen. I've done it myself when I was younger. You know, and if two guys came at me right now, I'd be like, oh, I'd do that and I'd do that. That's their expectation of reality. It never plays that way. You know, it never works that way. So when it comes down to how we define this aspect of reality and how we take that training, what we want to be looking at is not trying to cover all of those bases, because you cannot cover all of those bases in any dojo, any training scenario, anything like that. What we want to do is to look at the effectiveness of what you're doing and how you can apply it to the situation directly in front of you. Now, that may mean taking your dojo outdoors if you want to do that and do some outdoor stuff, but that's a little bit aside to where I want to go with this. When you're looking at that reality, invariably it comes down to not just the intensity, but the focus. And for me, the focus of how you train is the most important thing. You can train gently, you can train fast, you can train slow, you can train full tilt, but unless it has a defined focus and a strength of focus and intent from the temporary aggressor in your scenarios, it's never going to have any kind of reality whatsoever. And that doesn't mean that someone's got to try and knock your head off with a punch, but they've certainly got to drive through and let you feel what that feels like to have a resisted force coming into contact with your body. And I don't mean on the end of your nose. I'm talking about if you're blocking or deflecting or moving or trying to engage with that. It means trying to be actively resistant without being overly resistant. And it also means taking it to the next level, which is, you know, not just full resistance of training, but full resistance with the key to control the person who's actually defending and take it that way. And you can build these escalations nicely into your training programs, but you do have to start at ground level, you know, and this is where something like Aikido becomes very interesting, because Aikido itself is pretty much a complete martial art. It has gaps. There is no perfect martial art. It has gaps, but as it functions for the most part, it ticks most of the boxes. It has throws, it has ground controls, it has defensive movements, it has turning movements. In fact, it has some turning movements that you don't really find in many other martial arts, and that's one of Aikido's greatest strengths, which is something I'd like to put on the side burner as well. And it has perceptual awareness, situational awareness training, if instructors choose to do that. And that's what I would like to see people do more of, is start to engage not just with the technical side, but with the psychology of conflict and the interconnectivity between not just overly passive uke and tori movements, but just putting in a little bit more resistance training.
Sure. You know, I wanted to, as you were going there, a couple of ideas came to mind, and I want to touch on the UK one. But before that, you know, I just saw a video of I guess BJ Penn, who is a former champion MMA fighter, got into a street fight and got knocked cold on the second blow. And this relates to what I wanted to bring up with ukes, and that is, if you're going to prepare to face, let's say we could call it an enemy or an attacker, it seems important, like you want to have your simulated attacker attack you as close to what you want to train against as possible. And in Penn's case, he had a guy, kind of a chubby guy without a shirt on, just flailing, swinging away at him. And just like you'd see in any surveillance video of any bar fight or street fight, it's just fists flailing away. And the second one caught him right on the button and knocked him completely cold. And this is a former champion MMA fighter. So the idea that and he had tremendous technical ability. There's no question about that. But like you said, he was not prepared for an engagement in a real life situation. He never really turned it on. In fact, well, I guess he kind of did. There was something kind of funny in the video where the guy took an overhand right swing. He hit Penn in the head, and Penn basically had his hands kind of not really up, but he said, "Hit me again." And then the left one came over, caught him right on the jaw, knocked him out cold. So just to say, well, the better technical fighter will prevail, therefore we want to pursue ourselves to be better technical martial artists, therefore we will win, is a faulty formula at every point. Every point along the way. And I think with Aikido, the thing that I've noticed in training with many dojos, many organizations, even the one that I was trained in, it's so easy to fall into having uke being a little too sterile. There's one moment of attack. It's well telegraphed. There's no intent behind it. There are very few variety of attacks, and the ones that you have a highest chance of facing in reality are not part of the training curriculum at all. And I think if there's a first step, that would be it, to say, okay, we want to at least train our ukes to be that swinging, flailing guy that's going to try to just punch you in the head, because that is a good chance of what you're going to run across. In fact, I've just started with some brand new students, and I want to introduce them to, okay, when it's your turn to be uke, you need to have intent. You have to really try to hit somebody, not just throw an arm out and stay there while somebody else performs technique. To me, that's that first building block step towards training for reality, is to train ukes to be attacked for real. And initially it will be only one attack, but I don't think it should wait in the training cycle to start saying there will be a follow-up. There will be another type of attack, and it could be clumsy too. I've noticed in a lot of surveillance videos, the real attack isn't the fist as much as it is the body hurling in behind it. You can dodge the fist and then get tackled or tumble to the ground, because it's like two puppies tripping over each other. Like, it happens like that all the time. So I've started describing to my students, like, you have to appreciate there's more than one weapon coming at you. There's the body, and then there's the fist or the arm or the leg or whatever it is. You can't discount one and only deal with the other. So, but yeah, I think that the sharpening up uke's skills and making their attack more realistic, I think, is important. And a really good uke can do the same kind of flailing, highly intense attack at a slower speed, so that their nage, if their nage is newer, they can learn. They're not going to overwhelm them with intensity. What would you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And what I do, Tristan, is when I'm teaching, from about I'm trying to even remember. It depends on the level of capability of the student, but usually from about second, third belt, maybe orange belt onwards, 7th Q onwards, we never deal with one attack. We always do 1, 2, 3 move combos. So, for example, if we're doing Ikkyo on the left, it would be a right hook followed by a left cross, and it's the left cross you're going to take for Ikkyo. The right hook, you're just trying to get a deflection or a body movement in away from, and as they turn to perform the left cross, that's you got a utilizable tool, and that's your body movement that will be used for that. The body movement gets you away from the right hook, and then when the left cross comes in, you can take that and use it. Sometimes we do more than that. Sometimes we throw in the odd grab, knee, elbow type training as you go higher up the grades, and it's not there to take it out of its traditional context. But what I do that I haven't seen a lot of people do, and I would advocate this because it's good fun as well, is before you teach your student Shomenuchi, Yokomenuchi, all of these weird things, because as soon as you put a student's hand in like this and like this, they immediately look at it and start to seize up because it's alien. Go with the slap. Everyone knows how to slap, and they can slap with a good degree of accuracy. It happened to me last week. We're training outdoors, new fella. I said, right, you're going to slap me. And I went, okay. I turned to the class and went, that's exactly how easy it is to get hit in the face. In my head, I'm going, oh, you little biscuit. But it was beautiful. And I was laughing. everybody went into an uproar. And I was like, yeah, okay. Because I was just like, you're going to slap me, whack. He didn't even think about it. He just did it.
Sure.
And it was great, and it was a juniors class. The guy's only 14, he just slapped me across the face, and I'm like, okay, yep, that's what I get for asking for it. He didn't even hesitate because it's such a natural thing to do. And everyone doubts these types of emotions like slaps and all those kind of things. But I'll tell you, if you ever watch that Russian slap competition they do,
yes, I've seen those.
Fair amount of power goes into that. And trust me, a 14-year-old can hit you pretty hard with a slap. Trust me.
Absolutely, yep.
And we start with that because it's a known movement. And before you start giving your students awkward movements, this is my washizuki. Oh, isn't that beautiful? Well, no, not really, because nobody's going to do that. Before we start doing that, let's stick to what they can do. And that's what we do. I work with the students. Have you ever done anything before? Have you got any experience in this? Right? Have you done anything? Shoot, right, slap my hand, bang. Okay, that's how you're going to attack for the next couple of weeks. Forget about all this fancy stuff that you see everyone else doing. You focus on that, because rather than me trying to retrain them into some way of being able to use this, I want them to leave from lesson 1 with something useful, even if it's something that they know how to do, but we help them do it better. Get their body weight behind the slap, a little bit of heavy arm, heavy body in the hand, and working on that kind of thing. But what that means,
funny that you do that, because I've started teaching my students basic striking mechanics, punching mechanics, the bone strikes, all of that stuff. I started doing and actually put it on my first belt test, like about 2 years. Well, time's passed a lot. It's like 2-3 years ago now. And students really like it, and I'll tell them, like, just because we have an art that is not designed for hard hitting, that doesn't mean that you guys as martial artists, I don't want to have you know how to hit hard. To me, if you are martial artists worth your salt, you know how to hit hard. You don't have to do it, but you have to know how to do it, and you have to know how to spot somebody that knows how to do it.
Yeah,
and that's the important part. Is you see now when you train against somebody that will show you what a shifting body is. That should be a danger flag, and that will be the trigger you're looking for to start your movement, to see when somebody uses those mechanics against you. I think it's important, and they take right to it, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell all my students, it doesn't matter what weight you are, and it doesn't matter how heavy you are. If you can get that transfer of weight onto the end of your slap or your attack, doesn't matter what the attack is. We as human beings, we're not made for these linear punches, really. We can generate a lot of power, but it requires a lot of technical skill. However, we're made for stamping, and we're made for slapping and whacking, and that's where I start with students, because it allows them
That's a great place to start.
It is, because it's simple things we do anyway, and I'm not talking about stamping on toes and slapping them in the face. I'm talking about in the dojo element here, where I want to give my more senior students something to think about. So they're all great practicing straight showmen strikes and yokomen strikes and ski into lovely, beautiful big kotegaishis, and then somebody comes up and slaps them, and it just gives me joy to watch that. The funniest thing ever, usually because I'm standing there with a palm mark on my face as well. Also, it allows you to train relatively safely, because if someone gets hit, they're only getting hit with a slap.
Right.
So it allows you to ramp up the intensity a little. So it's a safer way to train, but also it's less formulaic. Now, I know the Aikido purists are going to be going, oh, you can't do that. Well, yeah, bloody can. But at the end of the day, we can't neglect the technical aspect, i.e. the shomanuchi is a bokken cut. And when you're practicing bokken, you're practicing shomanuchi. But what also I like to see come across is look beyond the basic movements. I've been to a lot of dojo, and I hear them talking about shomanuchi this is shomanuchi, and you attack like that. And I say, yeah, but what about the shomanuchi defense? And they look at me blank. And I'm saying, by teaching your students how to do a proper shomanuchi, you're actually teaching them their first deflection by lifting the arm. That's a deflection movement. It's not about the attack. And I see a light go on in some of them. And they're like, I never thought of that. The lifting the sword, you're actually deflecting using the outside of your arm. You're doing a defense, but you're perfectly framing your head with a defensive movement. So going from bokken to here, you're effectively learning to cage your head to defend against it, which is a perfect defense against the slap. So the first thing my students get is, here's the first couple of blocking movements, straight up and down. There's your defense right there. Practice that 100 times. I'll come back and get you. Right, slap him and defend. And he just raises his arm and he's got his defense. And people walk away from their first lesson thinking, that's really cool. I can do the attacks and we can do the defense. And if it's the kids' class, you see them all standing outside in the car park, trying to slap each other, waiting on their parents coming. And it changes the concept of trying to learn something. Now, we've all seen this before, because you suddenly tell someone, right, you're going to strike Shomanuchi to the top of the head, and they do that and they immediately seize up. And then it becomes this big mechanical cut, because they've not yet learned to relax the shoulders, use the trapezius muscles to draw the arm back, and use the tricep muscles to bring the arm forward and cut. They've not learned any of this, how to project through the tegatana. They've not learned how to move the body properly. And more importantly, their feet and their hands are now discombobulated, because they're now doing something that's alien that they've never done before. The same as when you give someone a blocking and tell them to take 3 steps and cut on every step. I've seen people struggle with that for years, because as soon as you give them something that changes their perspective on where their physical body ends, i.e. the extension through a blocking or a jo, they lose contact in the mind with the feet and the hips. We've all seen this. Every instructor has seen this. To bring it back into that realism aspect, give your students things, and this is where it comes on to the instructors. Give your students things that they can do. Don't suddenly throw them into a world of can't do. Then start to merge the two, so that all these strikes and slaps, actually, I was going to say it might not win a fight in the street, but it actually could. Because a strike can just as easily become a plant, which with proper focus and intention with the body behind it, could just as easily be used to push somebody, that's attacking you.
Even with a slap, if you slide the hand up and use the bone strike to the jaw, and use a heavy hand, you can knock somebody cold with that. I mean, you've
got different strikes there. You've got teisho, you've got haito, you've got all these different little strikes that you can do. But what I want to tell them is, it doesn't matter how big you are. If I'm to say to someone, would you stand there while I swing a bag with 6 kilo of sand in it, 7 kilos of sand, I'm going to swing that at your head and you're going to stand there and let me hit you. Most folk will be like, no. But when you strike, when you learn to get your body weight behind it, if you can get 6 stone, if you're only 6 stone in weight, if you can get half of that, if you can get 3 stone behind the weight of your strike, that's the same as getting hit with 3 times that. And it's about starting to let your students understand how they can bring these skills. This is reality. Bring these skills into a situation where they can't control every element, if they are forced into a position to do something, they can do something that's comfortable, rather than trying to adopt a stance, adopt a posture. Give the old 3 warnings thing that everybody used to talk about back in the 80s, when I did karate, when I started karate back in the early 80s. You've got to give them 3 warnings. You've got to get into a stance and stand there, tell them you do karate and give them 3 warnings. Okay, that's going to happen. There's this whole kind of, let's lose all the faff and all the fluff behind us. And when we go to train I try to avoid using the term reality. I try to use the term applicability. We want to be able to apply what we are teaching and what we are learning in the dojo. And by applying it in those fashions, it makes it more accessible for the majority of your students. And it's something that they can immediately bring to use. It doesn't matter if you've got a wee, I'm trying to think, 70-pound female in the class, but she can hit with 35 pounds of force behind her hand. Even if it's only a slap, that's going to get her a good couple of seconds to get the hell out of dodge.
Yep, absolutely. And I've found that if you segment the form from the power and the intensity, and then you introduce the control part, you can sort of juggle around. For example, like with the slap, I like having a Muay Thai pad or a heavy pad, so students can practice. Once I show them the form, like here's how you connect the body movement to the slap, so you can deliver power. You go for penetration, how you want to land the hand on the target, hit the pad with power. Just use that to study the form. Now with one another, we put the pads down. Now we're going to practice control. You want the same form, but you back the intensity way down. So now you can see the actual target. You can track it, the person as they move. You follow through. and that's where you want to shoot for the control. But you don't just unleash 100% intensity on a training partner.
No, you don't.
Shock him in the draw. That's ridiculous. But if you train each of those components in the realm that you can train them safely, then they can be put together. And putting them together, once you have good form that's reliable, your body clicks in and it does it every time. It can do it with power, but you can also do it with control. And this is, to me, where I like my Aikido with my students going, where they can do full power if they want. They can do half power if they want. If they only need 20%, they can do 20%. And the great part about a slap is you get the head to turn. That's the control of Kazushi. It's not about how hard you blast the jaw or the face. It's really about how you control the skeleton. So now you've got the form to do it. The intensity is you've got the control to apply whatever you need. And in training, we're going to apply less than we would be causing damage. But the targeting is there, the body, the form is there, and that's a big part, is the targeting, making sure that hand goes right where you want it to go.
It's got to go where it's got to go, and the intensity's there. You can keep the intensity and the focus there, but you don't have to be breaking each other's jaws and faces and arms.
Right.
That's the important thing. It's about training with that focus and intensity towards understanding that this is how much power I can bring to bear, and that aspect of focusing on the control side of things is absolutely vital for that, because it's when you're undertaking these movements. For example, Tenshinage applies itself great for the pushing hand. That's the next stage I go to. I know Ikkyo, technically first principle, because it's got all the technical skills in there. But when it comes to the technique I usually teach new students and newer students all the time, is Tenshinage, because it's
I love Tenshinage for that.
Yeah, it's at once an applied lock, arm control, arm bar, and strike, all at the same time if you want it to be. And it's easy to see where the one hand down, one hand up comes in. Then, okay, somebody's going to take a movement at you, right? You're going to, rather than going straight down, you're going to rotate the arm and lock the arm into an arm bar. Now you're going to push the face. Okay, now you're going to strike the face and practice the arm bar, and you practice all the different permutations. Sometimes Tenshinage becomes Shiten-nage, where the strike goes in marginally first, you know? And things like that. Now you've got to work on the foot movement, the placement. And Tenshinage, when you look at it, starts to get very similar to some of the straightforward aspects of judo, like Osotogari, where once you've got them in that position, if they're not going, you can take the leg. And it gives people something to focus on, rather than the biggest barrier to allowing your students to act for a situation they may require is where you get focused on, as you said, the small technicalities of it. You know, and I love technical training. I can spend years doing technical training in my bubble and never come out of it. I love it. But I also love the applied training, and I love the applied training because you can see
they really go hand in hand. Like they're necessary. They're intertwined.
Yeah,
you can do one or the other, but if you ignore one, the other one will suffer.
Absolutely, and that's where Aikido is right now. There's not enough applied that you see being done, because the applied, this is going to sound terrible, but it's just my experience of this. The applied requires the instructors to step out of their comfort zone, admit that what they're doing for the most part is technical, and then look at themselves and say, how can I apply what I'm doing? And how can I teach that to my students so that it becomes something of value to them if they ever had to use this in some way? And that also includes looking at how you as an instructor tell your students to deal with problems, how you treat your students, the philosophy behind the Aikido that you bring to bear. You know, because everyone thinks Aikido is it's about the art of peace and harmony and all this kind of thing. It is, but there's many ways to harmony. You know, if I find myself in a situation where I have to make that hard choice, whereby I have to cause serious damage to someone to keep them down, to stop them getting up, who may cause even more damage to me, then that is the path of least evil. And that's what I will do. And I don't care if that involves taking a brick and hitting them across the face with it. He can harmonize his face with the edge of this bit of brownstone. Like, you know, Hey, it's all peace and love and light. Well, you hit the ground, love and light. And but at the end of the day, you know, if this guy had a blade or something and forces me into action, and that's what I choose to do, it's about learning to live with the consequences of those actions, and about understanding that what you do will have a consequence if you take it beyond what's required. You know, and that's reality training. And it's important that we get that across to the students as well. We can all practice in the dojo until we are, you know, blue in the face, you know, unable to breathe, sweat dripping down us, totally, you know, hyperventilating, unable to get a breath. But at the end of the day, you know, most fights are over in seconds. You know, the only time cardio becomes an issue is when you drop someone and his 5 mates come out the bar and you're like, exit stage right. That's when cardio becomes an issue. That's when I start to fail. That's why I've got to be good at what I do, because my cardio is awful.
You know, you bring up a really good point about the transition from the technical study to the applied study. And then I think this is where I hear a lot of people question well, how would this work in reality? And I've got a story from one of my students who many years ago, he's retired now, but he was a SWAT officer, a special weapons police officer. And we've been working on Tenshinage, and I like that this is the perfect example of why I love Tenshinage and teaching it right from the get-go. And we'd boiled down to what I found is the handiest and most reliable ways of getting somebody from vertical to horizontal with Tenshinage. And one of the technical aspects I stole from Yamada Sensei, where you use the hips to drive somebody off their feet. And this student of mine, he was probably intermediate by that point. I think he was purple belt or so. And he went to a training session up at, it was an outdoor one where they set up the cardboard walls and they have a big tower and they're shooting, you know, simunition paintball shots out of their pistols and whatnot. And you know, he was sweeping this house and he comes through with his pistol and there's this guy, big, much bigger than he was, younger, stronger, and he had his bare hands open. And my student charged forward, put his pistol in his holster and walked by him and did a Tenshinage. It was quick, but this guy, he was looking around for the second person that actually took him down, because he could not believe that he was taken down so fast without it feeling like he was wrestled to the ground. Because he's like, this guy, I've got him, you know, I got him bare hands and he's charging me, and then he's suddenly on his back. And I still remember my student coming back. He says, boy, that Tenshinage, that works great. You know, he didn't even start by grabbing me. I just went past him and used that hip, and it just, he was, the next thing I saw was his feet, and he was on his back and he didn't even know it. And he said that the examiners they said they were shocked and impressed about how fast he got taken down. But so few people get an experience like that, where there was no dojo environment. In this case, it was a training environment, but the intensity was very high. And you know, there was no expectation. The person, you know, had no idea what was about to happen, and it worked beautifully. Like he said, this was textbook. I couldn't have asked for a better outcome. You know, and sadly, you know, unlike sport fights, which are filmed and we can watch videos, a lot of this stuff that happens, there is no video of, or there's very, very little for us to study and make, you know, a case on YouTube for how these things work in application. But the testament of people who have done it, whether they're, you know, bouncers, security, police officers, you know, even through intense training examples like that, especially with somebody who was not an Aikidoka, he had no idea what my student was capable of doing, how it actually happens that way. You know, there's many of these stories that have come out, but it's not as compelling as, you know, watching a championship fight or something of that nature, or a movie, you know, people expecting to be John Wick or something of that nature, because that's, you know, what they see. They want it to look like that, or they want their Aikido to look like, you know, Steven Seagal or something like that. You know, from the movies with the choreographed fight scenes. They're very dramatic, but you know, it's but to me, that reality part is the holy grail that we're seeking. and to get as close as we can to in our training to be effective for when that happens. And so,
and you've kind of brought up something now that I'm going to bring back out the bag, which was I got a lot of people now. One of my best students right now started with me several years ago. Maybe not. I'm not telling he's my best student because he's not, but he's. I just know I'm getting too big for his boots. He's a good student, incredibly loyal, but he came from a cage fighting and MMA background, and he'd heard about it, heard it was rubbish, and he came in, and perhaps it was because of the way I teach, maybe the way I train, maybe the different stuff we do, but he get hooked in it and he loves it now. And he still keeps up his boxing training, he still keeps up his Muay Thai training, you know, and if I want someone to try and slice me in half with a leg or an elbow when I'm showing classes, this is the guy I bring out the bag, because I know if I don't do this properly, they're going to be waking me up with a bucket of ice water about 20 minutes later. And I have told them if that ever happens, you'd better bloody not be there when I wake up. I see this angry guy with a bulge on his head chasing someone down the street in a car. When it comes to that type of training, what we've got to remember is everyone is now looking to the kind of mixed martial arts and things as this is as close to reality as you'll get. Now, let's just burst this bubble wide open, and I don't mind doing that right now. All MMA fights, short of spontaneous, uncontrolled fights, underground fights, you know, bare knuckle stuff that does happen. You know, but even in the UK, bare knuckle boxing is not illegal in the UK, but you get like 3 months lead into it. You know, it's rare to just get underground bare knuckle clubs that occur nowadays. I dare say they're still there, but the same in the States. You know, that's real fighting. Those guys don't know what they're getting into. Okay, so let's move all the underground, you know, dark web, you know, crazy stuff aside. Fight Club, just like we were talking about earlier, put all that aside. That's for the people that are involved in that lifestyle. That's a lifestyle choice. You know, when we look at things like MMA bouts, particularly ones that end up on television, when we look at the fracas, like the Logan Paul, Floyd Mayweather thing that just happened, right? Even professional boxing, you're entering a ring and a fight where you have got several months lead-in time. You've got time to check out your opponent's form, look at the previous fights, check out their strengths and weaknesses. You've got months to prepare for your fight, physically and mentally, more importantly.
And to form your own plan.
Form your own plan, yeah. You're entering a controlled environment. You're entering a dangerous environment, but you're agreeing the rules of engagement because there are rules to the system. It's violent, but it's an agreed level of violence. You should not be experiencing anything over and above what you yourself would be anticipating to give out. It's an agreed level of violence. That's really important because that changes your mindset. You know you may hurt them permanently and they may hurt you permanently, but if you can live with that situation scenario as part of your sport, then that's how it goes, same as in boxing. You understand the environment you're moving into. You're in control of the date, effectively, because you could change the date if you're suddenly unwell. You can control the time if something happened. You know, for the most part, these things are mutable. You have a lot of control over this supposed realistic environment, and you have safeguards in place. Someone is going to step in and stop the fight if your life is in danger. That does not sound realistic. Your
chances are your weight classes are the same. You're roughly around the same skill level.
The person you're fighting is going to be roughly the same weight category, roughly the same level of skill, and will have, you know, investigated you just as much as you've investigated them. And so that is by no means, no, don't get me wrong, these guys are tremendous athletes.
Absolutely,
really good
they are.
For the most part, tremendous athletes, for the most part, really good fighters. But they tend to be jack of all trades, mostly master of none, except for a few who have been absolute legends in the MMA environment. But that is not a real scenario. That is not a real environment. Anyone who thinks that MMA is as close as you'll get to a real fight, you need to take a good long hard look at what the world's actually like just now. It's nothing like that environment.
And you had a really great list, but I think you missed the biggest one, and that is they both know when the fight starts exactly.
Exactly. Yes.
In a real situation, the one who chooses to fight and acts first usually will prevail. that first strike while the other person's still confused about, all right, am I arguing with somebody? What's happening? The ambush, it's a huge deal, and that no sport fighter deals with that. Not one of them.
I used to get this all the time when I did a lot of competition karate back in my 20s, and we changed how we fought from time to time. Sometimes it was with pads, sometimes it was without pads. There was a phase in the UK back in the mid-90s where they took pads out for competitions. It was to discourage strong punches to the head because you'd probably break your hand. So everything had to be controlled. So there was no pads on the hands at all. The feet were still padded, but the shin and instep still had pads, but the hands were not. And you took some serious punishment to the body. All of a sudden, Mawashizuki or a Maiken straight to the chest, that hurt, but people used to say to me, particularly people at work, how can you do that? I mean, you could get hurt. And you don't think about it. You're like, yeah, but it's part of the sport and I enjoy it. And it's skill against skill. And I'm watching the guy I'm fighting before we go on, and I check out his form in previous fights. The first fight's always the hardest because you don't know who you're facing up against. That was always the hardest one because it was like in a round robin knockout competition. 100 people there, then it's down to 50 people by the next fight. I'm sure they've all seen Karate Kid. They know how this works.
And it's very rare. In fact, I heard that this used to happen more often in the past, but they've really gotten away from it. Of you don't know who you're going to fight on a given night. Like you just have a pool of fighters together and they randomly pick. No fighters or managers seem to want to deal with that. They say no, we're not. We want to know who our opponent is well ahead of time, so we can study, form our plan, all that other stuff. Yeah. That's
right. And I know, rather than turning up and you're facing even Drago, do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, okay. This is going to go well. You know what I mean?
Well, actually, yeah, and you bring up something that I did want to cover within this discussion, because this is often one of the go-tos for, well, how do we train for intensity? And that is, we'll pad up, we'll armor up a fighter or an attacker. They put them either in a red man suit, on the extreme side, or they'll put a, body pad, headgear on, or some kind of helmet, gloves. And, I know there are different schools of thought of this. I'm not a big fan of those because once you put gear on, you become fearless. And if you do get hit or dinged, you can just ignore it and go right through it.
Yeah, it doesn't make you cautious.
To me, there's always the compromise, the distortions for safety. Either you're going to slow down and have more control, or you're going to pad up and go 100% intensity, and it's going to be kind of different. Targeting is going to be different. Of course, should you ever get into a fight, you're not going to have headgear, a mouth guard on, gloves. You're probably going to be caught like you're just walking down the street. So that the idea that you train to get used to that comfort of having the padding, to me is a distortion I don't care for. I know some do, and there's some good things that happen, but and I do use some glove padding just to kind of take away a bit of the fear for newer students. But I find that getting used to the stress of actual knuckles, no safety gear, kind of makes you more careful. And I want to train my students to be careful, cover your head, do not get hit. It's important. So if you get used to the padding, you can get used to kind of, I can take some shots. It's no big deal. What are your thoughts on the padding and things like that?
Yeah, it has a purpose, but I do agree with you. What it doesn't do is prepare you for getting hit, because it's unless I do some occasional focus pad work for a semi-professional boxer, and he's fast, but I'm very fast. My hands very slow with my legs, and I'll wear a body shield as well, which is great conditioning for your torso, let me tell you, when this guy starts doing body shots. And that's one of the good things about it is if I were training with someone who couldn't generate the same amount of power as this individual, I would be getting no benefit. I would be thinking that if this guy were to hit me and I wasn't wearing this, there's not that much behind it. And it doesn't prepare you for it. It's wearing padding, particularly. Also, what we have to remember is padding interferes with your natural body movement. And when you get into a real situation, unless you intend to go through the rest of your life looking like the Goodyear blimp, you're not going to be walking about with padding on if anything were to happen to you. So it's, or if you were, you're really going to, I mean, you're actually going to incite some violence against you, I think, because people see padding, they just want to punch it. And it depends on the circumstance. It depends on the nature of what you're doing. If you were doing a lot of strikes to the head, there'd be nothing wrong with wearing a head shield and giving someone, maybe some 8-ounce boxing gloves or something. But the problem with that is, or MMA gloves, the problem with that is you can't use your thumbs. So if you're attacking and you see an option, or sorry, not an option, an opening with the person you're attacking to also throw in katagatame or a little Rokyo elbow lock or something like that, or hijishime, and you try and grab them, well, you've gone 10,000 years down the evolutionary scale, because you're, in fact, probably more, because your opposable thumbs are right out the window right now, so you can't actually do it. It's, try opening a can of Coke with a pair of boxing gloves on and then try and drink it. It doesn't happen. So it's you can lose one of the tools by wearing padding, and unless it's very good stuff. We find that as well. I never use padding in any of the training. The exception to that is when I'm doing some of the HEMA stuff, where if we upgrade from PU to metal weapons, blunt metal weapons, you have to be armored for that.
Oh yeah, you have to.
You have to, because otherwise you're in hospital. But at the end of the day, for just generic training purposes, and also something that's applicable to you have to. I think you don't have to wear padding. There's also something else, and we also have no hakama days and no gi nights in my classes, because my hakama weighs a lot, and it sits nice on the hips and it pulls you down, and it's a great training utility, but you need to learn to work without it. It gives you good hip placement, it gives you good focus on dropping your center and getting that proper hip rotation, through the base of the spine, to keep everything focused forward and to keep all your kime in the correct place when you're making attacks and defenses. But when you take it off, all of a sudden you feel kind of very naked and exposed. And it feels different. Your Aikido feels different when you. That's what everyone.
It does. I've always liked the hip support of the ties and the wrap part. But
all my students wear hakama. I don't care what grade you are. Everyone wears a hakama, because it gives you that support and that groundedness that lets them work on their foot movement. Don't get me wrong. Occasionally they look like giant nappies, because I get them to tuck them in so I can see what their feet are doing. But again, that just looks good in photographs. That's just one of those small things I do to my students to give me a giggle. Put the big nappy
exactly
on,
but then you start to move without it, and it'd be like a kind of like a crutch. You don't want to have to rely on crutches all the time. So that's where I think you're right. It's you get used to the body alignment, the correct body alignment, and then you can do it without the hakama. That's where you're headed.
And then when you take away the gi completely and you just train in joggers and a t-shirt, it feels even more bizarre, and you almost have to retrain, because particularly in a technical martial art like Aikido, there is a certain level of, I don't want to use the term ritual, because that makes people think that we're doing some sort of religious practice. We're not. We're doing a martial art. But putting on, I was always told, when you put on your gi, that's you leaving the outside world behind, and you focus on the dojo and how you're training. When you take off your gi, you step out of the dojo and you can get back into the real world. And it's like a bubble. You enter the training bubble for that period. And that's how I was originally
trained. I've heard boxers do the same, look at getting their hands taped up or taping up their hands and putting gloves on the same way. They start to get into a mindset.
That's
and it gets them into where the mental zone they should be in.
Yeah.
Which is another great difference from the list that you had before, which is you walk around a corner, you could be faced with a situation in 12 seconds that's going to turn into a fight. You don't have time to go through your ritual and get into a mindset.
No, that's what I was going to say.
And suddenly you're in an argument, or somebody's in your face, and now you got to deal with a verbal exchange and to assess, okay, how can I get out of here? Do I have to deal with this guy? Is he going to get physical? You're reading your opponent, just boom, it can happen quickly.
One of my old students said doesn't train anymore due to health reasons. Unfortunately, he was unfortunately attacked and dropped in seconds because he was at the bar watching a soccer game. I'm using terms everyone will understand here, because if we start talking football, I'm going to shout "Go Vikings" and everybody's going to get confused. I'm actually not talking about sport. He was watching a soccer game. He had 6 pints watching the game. He came out, went next door, got himself a chicken kebab and a can of cola, walked out the shop, someone missed a punch, they were throwing at someone, hit him in the face, and down he went.
Wow.
His three mates grabbed him and pulled him aside. Two of them also got assaulted because everyone assumed that my student Alan was part of the group that was in the fight. And it just happened.
Right.
Now,
that's another thing. Ask how many fighters have a pitcher of beer before they compete.
Yeah, exactly.
None.
Yeah, I know. And that's
Zero.
what I was talking about your physical condition.
Yeah.
You know, most of us go out, even, you know, Friday lunchtime. I know people that maybe go out for a meal, or they used to before you know, the zombie apocalypse. You know, when you go out for a meal on a Friday for lunch, or you maybe take a client out, you'd maybe have half a glass of wine or half a beer or something with the meal with the client. That's that immediately impairs you. I don't get, you know, people can claim that they can take all the alcohol and it doesn't affect them, but it's not true. It does impair you. You know, so even situations like that, a member of my office was assaulted going into work after he parked his car outside the office in the centre of Glasgow in a housing scheme that was adjacent to the office on a case of mistaken identity. And he was pushed into a fence, repeatedly kicked. Then the person apologised, helped him up to his feet, brushed him down, said, "I'm really sorry about that. I thought you were someone else," and walked off. Meanwhile, he's standing there, his nose is bleeding, he doesn't know what the hell's happened. You know, it was completely unprovoked. That's reality, that's the type of thing. And that's where the situational awareness aspect comes in. This is where the Ma'ai and the focus and the Kimi that you learn in traditional martial arts really comes into its own. Now, we can't be switched on all the time, but it's useful to always apply these, you know, situational awareness skills that you learn in the dojo. And that comes into play even when we don't realise it. You know, when we're doing group work with the Joe or the Bokken or something like that, you have to be aware of everyone going on round about you. If you're on a course, 50, 60 people all swinging wooden weapons, you have to keep your wits about you. And when you work in Ninin Dori, Tanin Judori, whatever you want to call it, Sanin Dori, you know, multiple attacker stuff, that builds your situational awareness. And that's what I try and get across to my students. We're not teaching you to fight against multiple people. We're teaching you to keep your wits while there's a number of ongoing variables within this controlled environment. And what we're wanting you to do is to not get taken down, control the environment as best you can. There's the door over there, you're over here, you've got to get to that door. And the three of them are in the way. You know, they're all under orders. One's told to come in with slaps or takedowns, one's told to try and tackle the legs. You know, one's maybe got a wooden weapon and they're just threatening them with it, trying to hold them off with it. You know, and we run those types of scenarios as well, not for realism, not to teach people how to fight, but to just show you this is how difficult this is. Because this whole one-on-one scenario is a myth, it's a dream. If you ever get into trouble and it's a one-on-one scenario, you might as well tick a gift box, because the chances of that happening again are minimal. You know,
yeah, I'm not sure how, from what I've seen in the UK, that happens quite a bit. I know here in the US, fights on a street will gather people instantly. And once they gather, they want to see a fight, and they'll often get their licks in when they feel they can get a free shot. And they'll kick and stomp and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier I also do Glima, which is Scandinavian wrestling and historical martial arts. The rules of Glima are simple. You engage with your opponent. The first one onto the ground while one standing loses. Because in a real situation, that's it. As soon as you're on the ground, everyone else piles in. That's it. And that's the philosophy. And I bring that into Aikido. So when we do that type of work, it's not designed to make people feel bad about themselves. It's designed to hit home that reality of you do not have the comfort of engaging one-on-one with someone, tying them up in knots, putting an armbar on, because while you're doing that, in fact, this was a fun one. I made a circle of about, it was on a course, 20 students, and I gave two of them, you know those swimming noodles, those long
pool noodles.
I gave two of them, and everyone stood with their hands behind their backs. Then one person in the middle and one engager, and that engager had to get that individual down onto the ground or vice versa. But somewhere along the line, any one of those guys with the swimming noodle could start ladling in. They may choose not to, they may choose they will. And so it added a sense of kind of strange paranoia that someone's trying to defend himself they don't know who in the crowd is friendly, if at all. They may have been, they may have not, they may not. And sometimes nobody attacked. Sometimes both come in at the same time. Sometimes only one come in. But it was a great thing to do in the course, and everyone loved it, because it said, you just appreciate that once that crowd starts to gather, you do not know where the threat assessment stops. Every single one of them is a potential threat, depending on how this situation goes.
And people can pop out of nowhere.
And they can just come out. Yeah. So it was a good exercise in threat assessment and situational awareness. And every single person said, as soon as that circle appeared, I just felt trapped, and I didn't like it, and it made me feel horrible. And I don't want to find myself in that situation. And that's what it was designed for. It wasn't designed to make people fearful. You know, this is the type of training that I like to do, because it takes in as safe a way as possible. By the way, I should point out, I got whacked over the back of the head with a swimming noodle.
Yep.
I got.
Oh yeah, you're not going to create the perfect ninja who is impervious.
Yeah. Because what they actually did was, obviously I was refereeing this, and then when it came to be my turn, they moved them about. What I didn't realise is the sneaky fatherless children that I train with sometimes, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They gave the noodle to the guy that was refereeing the match.
Clever.
And I wasn't looking for him.
Right.
And he beat me so hard with a yellow swimming noodle. I just remember lying on the ground getting beaten with this plastic noodle. It was really, I'm trying not to laugh, but at the same time, my partner got me into some kind of weird figure 4 cross leg lock using that nerve at the base of the calf. So I was screaming and laughing and getting battered about the head with a noodle. But again, it just made me aware you can't trust anyone. And that once that situation kicks off, you can't trust anyone. And everyone learned that day. It was good fun, you know. But at the same time, we all walked away with a great sense of seriousness. For me, this is reality training. It's preparing you for circumstances that you cannot hope to control every aspect of. And even by doing those types of scenarios, by doing that once, you then think, right, okay, this guy's coming on at me. There's a crowd starting to gather. I've got two options here. I either back down completely, or I choose to engage. And I can't trust anyone in my environment right now. So where do I go with this? And for me, you know, 99 times out of 100, I'm going to back down. You know, I've got nothing to prove.
Right.
No, I've got nothing to prove.
Estimate when you have to intercede and when you don't, and to make that decision. And for people listening, because I've done almost exactly the same thing with my students. I've told a student to ambush another one when he wasn't looking. You know, I've done it when I'm overseeing a randori or some kind of an exercise, and Nage is, you know, moving around really well, and then walks right by me, and then I'll just put my arm out. Suddenly, because he didn't think I was going to be a threat, for exactly the same reason that you did. You cannot overlook anybody at any time. It just, and it's not that you're being a jackass instructor or trying to be difficult. What you're doing is forming the mind and the perception and the habits that it will get into when it becomes a stressful situation. And this is a subject I wanted to cover with our discussion. And this is one of my favorite things to bring out in training, which is stress inoculation. And again, just like the intensity, it doesn't mean scaring the daylights out of the students, but get them used to people moving fast, being aggressive towards them, and you know, rushing towards it. Because if somebody, it's a different thing for me to stand in front of you at an arm's reach and I reach out and I grab your throat. It's another thing for me to come rushing up to you at a sprint and reaching out to grab your throat. Seeing somebody running at you with intent can suddenly raise your anxiety level. And so getting students used to seeing those things and being like, I know how to get out of the way. I know when to do it. I'm comfortable with this, and to keep their anxiety level low. Like, that is the point of the stress inoculation part. And that kind of, as we've been talking about these different things, I think in training, those are different characteristics that you need to train students on separately. And then as they get comfortable with them separately, you start combining them. So they can operate in a randori, keeping their level of calm. They don't let the anxiety come up. Their breathing starts to cut short. They start forgetting about moving their feet and moving around. That's how it all starts to thread together. But you don't do it just by going 100% intensity all the time. And I found that even new students, white belts, like that. They like getting comfortable and not being anxious when they see somebody rush at them and try to tackle them or grab them or punch them. And for ones that are really shy initially, I'll just have them hold a pad up and, you know, say, okay, you're going to hold the pad and Uke is going to run at the pad and punch the pad. So you kind of separate themselves from that anxiety. They're not punching you in the head, and it works. And within just a couple of minutes, you say, okay, now they're going to run up and grab you by the throat. Okay, well, you know, they run up and you step aside. It's just a progressive way to get more comfortable with that, because really, to me, that a superb martial artist, that is the realm that they flourish in. That's what we're going for. Pure chaos, 100% intensity. It should not be, you're not going to be totally glass calm or, you know, smooth, but you're going to control your fear, control the anxiety and panic.
Yeah.
You're not going to slip into that heavy adrenalized scramble or go berserk. You know, you need to control, make smart decisions. And you can't do that if you're amped up and are frightened.
No, absolutely not.
I mean, there will be some fear, but you have to control it.
Yeah, absolutely, Tristan, I agree. And that's one of the areas where Aikido excels, because it's every martial art focuses on breathing. But Aikido, when you see the practice of Kokyu being done properly, where we are looking to take that breath before action, you know, that breath isn't just there to get oxygen into your body. It's there to buy that half a second where you can just step yourself into that stage, almost like quickly putting your gi on. And I don't mean in a real sense, but when you're working with a partner and you start practicing Kokyu, you're practicing how to interact your breathing with your body movement. Because I remember, again, one of the things that used to take people out more often than not in competition fights, and you still see it in boxing, and you still see it in MMA, is they get gassed very quickly. They just start running out of steam. Once you're 2, 3, 4 bouts in, you know, it happens really quick. I see it in Glima as well all the time. You know, within 30 seconds when you're wrestling with someone, and I'm not talking, you know, WWF stuff. I'm talking about proper like wrestling, try to take each other to the ground. If you're not careful, you're going to get gassed really quickly. And the bigger guys gas even faster than the smaller guys. You know, so it becomes a balance of tactics and skill and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, in Aikido, we're one of the few martial arts where every movement we do, and that's why I'm a big advocate of the technical aspect of things and the Kokyu aspect. And because if every movement you do is in line with your breathing, then everything that you attempt has been taken with a good body of air in the body. Your body's not starting to become anaerobic. You're keeping the blood pumping, you're keeping the oxygen going, therefore you're keeping your brain going properly. Your vision shouldn't start to shut down too quickly. You know, everything feels much more active and alive, as opposed to we start to hyperventilate and panic. And more often than not, I've been in a couple of real situations. I've only ever had to take action once, and every other time, it's that sense of calmness and keeping calm with myself. And I should say the only time I've ever taken action was back in my karate days. When I started training in Aikido, I suddenly found that I was more able to almost like take a step out of myself for a minute while the escalation phase of the conflict was happening and look at this, you know, I don't want to say almost from a vicarious position, almost like a kind of an overseeing body looking out of myself to then gauge what was happening. It bought me several moments where I was able to assess the situation and look at really what's going on here. Is it not better to just choose to de-escalate this straight away? And that's skills we look at. You know, I'm by no means, you know, a psychologist or a sports psychologist or anything like that, but we do try to work in class as well with ways to try and de-escalate situations, because not everyone comes into the martial arts wanting to be a fighter.
Right.
You know, and Aikido does attract a lot of people who have had previous trauma. A lot of people who come to me to train have actually been to other classes, and this swings both ways, and been treated really badly, been beaten up, been harassed, you know, in other martial arts because maybe weren't catching things up fast enough, or the class bully boy wasn't being pulled into line by the instructor, you know. But at the same time, not everyone wants to learn to fight. And that's something we need to respect in Aikido as well.
Sure.
Is that's why I try and make these reality engagements as engaging and fun as possible. Because we keep the fun in the training, even if it's training for not necessarily the scenario, which is what a lot of people become obsessed with. If someone attacks you in the street, what are you going to do? Well, you're scenario training right now, whereas I'm trying to not train scenarios. I'm trying to train applicability of skills and mindset, you know, in a given situation. That'll keep you safe more times than do this, do that, do the next thing. Because that only works if they do exactly what is in that scenario. And I've seen guys do in many different martial arts do that. It happens in BJJ, it happens in Krav, it happens in karate. I've been there, I've done it, I've taught it. You know, where this is what you do when someone attacks you. That only works if that scenario applies. You know, and unless you're going to drill that 100,000 times so that it becomes muscle memory, you don't even have to think about it, and then move on to something else, you're not going to capture any small change in that scenario. And the best example of this I can give is, you could scenario train with a front grab, you know. Oh God, oh my Aikido language.
Munadori.
Munadori, aye.
Munadori,
if you take Munadori, that's great. Thank you. I just...
It happens.
What happens when someone grabs it upside down? And for a minute you think, ooh, and that ooh moment is what's going to get you hit.
Yep.
Because all you've done is train a scenario from that way. And the first thing, this boils my biscuit. That's a Scottish phrase. I just made it up. What really, you know, bakes my noodle, not my swimming one, is when people say, "Oh, you've not grabbed me right." Oh, don't say that. Deal with what you've got, because that's scenario training where you're like, "Oh, you've grabbed me the wrong way. Oh, sorry." You know, that's like, you know, that's like someone going to hit you. Oh, wait, would you not hit me in this side, please? Could you hit me in this side? Okay. No, this doesn't work. And that's where a lot of the technical martial arts start to fall down, because that's what people see. And we're trying to discourage that. Another aspect I do with my students is, if someone gives you something, take it and use it. Aikido is the art of giving, you know. So when someone gives you something, give them something back. Try something. You're better to try something, fail it, is tell them they've attacked you wrong.
Correct. You know, you touched on a really good concept, and I want to cover this before we move on too much. And that is, and this is a crucial to me, and that is energy management. Because, as you said, many fights only last a few seconds. There are some that last 20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, a few minutes. You don't know how long this is going to go. So you can explode out of the gate and use all kinds of athletics, and like you said, gas out. And if that happens, you're done. Like, you have nothing left. So to me, that's the way to train there is to focus on maximum efficiency, best, smartest choices to avoid having to be, you know, really athletic, but you want to stay calm and conserve your energy as much as possible. Let your attackers burn themselves out, or make them take the long way to get to you, make them have to work hard to get to you while you conserve your energy. And I think that's something that, you know, you don't see as much of in sport fighting, because they want exciting fights. They want high intensity. Those guys are highly trained, very, very fit. But they also have a defined amount of time that fight is going to be, and they train for that time. It might be over sooner than that, but you can't bank on it. You know, you have to train to be in your, you know, 3-minute rounds or a 20-minute fight or whatever it's going to be, you know. But, you know, I remember seeing a study, some gentleman had put together, like, he collected hundreds of fight videos, and he broke them down to how long did they last from basically the first punch until it was over. And I think he said something like 60% of them were over in less than 15 seconds. But there were some that went into 7 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes up to 18 or 20 minutes or more. And again, when you're surprised by the circumstances of life, you have no idea. You know, you might have to fight for 30 seconds, then run for 50 yards. There might be another fight. I mean, it could happen any number of ways. And to me, I've seen people that come in that are very, very fit, and they explode with all that energy. Even though their fitness level's high, they'll burn out very quickly, especially if they let the adrenaline start to come in, because that adrenaline will exhaust you like nothing. And it's crazy. But if you can manage that and be able to keep going, you're the one with gas in the tank when everybody else has run out. Like, to me, that fulfills that priority of you survive the fight. You may not win it, but if you survive it, first one is avoid a fight, second one, survive it, and then end it. If you can be the one to end it, that's what we're looking for.
One of the best examples of Aikido I can give, I've got two really good examples. And one of my students, he came out of his work in Glasgow, and he was waiting at the bus stop for his bus to go home. And a couple of the local idiots started harassing him, and they started kind of coming in to push him. And he said it was so strange. He says, I remembered what he taught me. He says, I focused on just breathing, and I stayed in just basic posture. He just extended his hands, and he just kept moving from side to side, not letting them get behind him. He says, and it started to become clear they were only out for a kind of wind up, but they just wanted to noise someone up. He says, but he said, I must have been doing this for about a minute and a half, and they were getting really agitated. And then that minute and a half bought me enough time that just by happenstance, a police car came around the corner, and it saw what was happening and stopped, and the two boys ran off. And the police got out, they asked him if he was all right. He said, yeah, fine. He says they were just pushing folk about. There was a woman there as well. She was quite upset. And what he did was he tried to get himself between the women and the youths. They were just, we call them Neds in Glasgow. They're just little mouthy bampots that just, like to harass people. They're usually armed as well, I should say, but in this case they weren't. But he said, I kept my head, I kept focus. He says, I just kept breathing, and I just kept buying time with the hope that something was going to happen. He says, and it did. And that was his strategy he took, and it worked. And that worked great for him, because he chose a strategy suitable for his environment. And that's how we try and train. Another one of my students, it was actually a fellow Shodan at the time. He was out in a club or a bar, and this one's a bit un-PC at times, but it's what he did. And he was out with one of his friends, and he went up to the bar, he got 2 pints, he turned, and there was a big gorilla guy beside him, turned at the same time, and Alan's drink went over this guy's front. So the guy immediately pushed him into someone else, and Alan's brain started to go a bit haywire, and he thought, no, I'm not having this, not here, too crowded, no room, nothing to do. So what he did was he started holding his face, and he went and started shaking back and forward. His friend came over, looked at the big gorilla, and said, look what you've done, it's his birthday. The big guy immediately changed. He just went, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't realise he'd special needs. Can I buy you both a drink? And the fella's like, no, I'm just going to take him out. And Alan's like, all the way outside. He says, we got outside and we ran like hell. And I said, that's some of the best Aikido I've ever heard of, because he played the scenario, and some people would look at that and go, what a coward, he didn't square up. There's no point squaring up to a fight you're not going to win.
Right.
This guy had hands.
Or a fight you don't need to fight.
Or a fight you don't need to fight over a bit of spilt beer.
Right.
He used his sense, he kept his head, and to me, that's training for reality. And some people might not like that. What Richie did at the bus stop, that's training for reality. Sometimes buying time is your best option. That's training for reality. It's not about being Bruce bloody Lee and jumping about and kicking people in the face and knocking them out. That's ego.
Right.
That's ego. And ego will get you killed 99 times out of 100.
About a week or two ago, I brought a friend of mine in who we work with grappling, and he's a very experienced wrestler and a police officer. And we were working a little bit, and I asked my students, do you have any questions for him? And they said, yeah, have you ever had any encounters with a knife? And he says, yes, I have. I've had several, and I've survived all of them. And of course, they were fascinated. Well, what did you do? And he says, the first thing I need to tell you is they did not look like, and he grabbed a training knife and held it out. Says, it did not look like that. almost always was, I see somebody putting their hand in their pocket or in their belt loop, and I basically grab them and tackle them and take them down. Mm-hmm. But to me, this comes back to your point earlier of your situational awareness. Knives, and I could go on about Aikido and knife work because it's one of my pet peeves. But the reality of, in this case, somebody starts to draw a knife on you or starts to draw a weapon, that is your moment where you have to decide either beat feet or deal with them, rather than waiting for a knife to come out and be held at your throat or be stabbing or cutting at you or what have you. And I think looking at how violence tends to go is something that any martial art needs to look objectively at. How does it really work, and how do we effectively deal with it, rather than say we're going to have a contrived attack and then a contrived defense, and we're going to play this little choreography game where, you know, we've made our imaginary world the way we would want it and the way that it works successfully to convince students that their art is effective. And I guess that's the part to chip away at and say, all right, let's adjust the model, and let's look at how we do this and apply the principles of Aikido, which I love, towards, all right, how do we stop this from going south? And intercepting it early, I think, is the key of what my friend pointed out. Like, this is how a police officer survives getting not getting stabbed, is he uses the Shodo Seizu, control the first move. He doesn't wait for that knife to come out. He'll get it before the hand comes out of the pocket or what have you.
Absolutely, yeah. And he's making a judgment call that person is reaching for a weapon, and he is well within his rights, particularly as a police officer, to engage and control, particularly if he's asked them, please keep your hands still. If you said, if you said, please keep your hand by your side where I can see them, and they start reaching for a pocket, you're well within your rights at that point to make an immediate threat assessment. This guy's going to do something, and then take action against that as a police officer. I can understand that perfectly well. And it also brings to light something that a lot of people forget, and what I don't see an awful lot of in many of the people that I train with at courses and things like that over the years, is Aikido is a very ballsy martial art. You have to be all in order for the techniques to work. You can't sit back and let the techniques come to you. Ireme is one of the defining principles of Aikido. You should be entering into the attack to prevent it. In fact, is it Westbrook and Ratty, the Aikido in the dynamic sphere? They hit on a really good martial principle. I think they called it the unified impact point or something like that, unified point of impact. And that if someone is going to attack you or throw a strike at you, in their mind, their brain has already determined distance, speed, and timing required to make contact. In order for you to survive that attack, you have to break that cycle of implementation that their brain has already set up, even before they've attempted to swing the punch. So what that means is changing distance. And if anyone ever gets the chance to train with me, you'll see that I am very big on the Ireme movement. It's all about getting in and closing the distance. If you can close the distance down, you get into a very close space where you still have your utility, but you're taking out several of your opponent's attacking factors all in one. You're taking out the capability to swing large punches, and you're taking out the capability to swing strong kicks. You're still exposed to knees and elbows, but that's great. That's where Aikido works, in close. We seem to forget that in these big sweeping movements that we see a lot. That's demonstration Aikido. And unfortunately, that's what seems to dominate the stage whenever people look at Aikido. They need to understand the difference between demonstrative Aikido and applied Aikido and technical Aikido. They're all very different things. But for me, that Ireme movement is king. Then the Ireme Tenkan becomes even more important, because that first movement, just like moving in Tenchinage, or even just moving in with the edge of your hand against a shoulder, I'm not light, I'm 17 stone, I'm a chunky lad. If I can move my whole body in and get 17 stone to collide with your shoulder joint as you pull a punch back, you're not recovering from that for a couple of seconds. If I can make that connection across the throat as I'm doing that, to move in for early entry movements for, again, Tenchinage or Kaiten Nage, for example, then I'm winning at this point. But if I stand back...
You'll take the posture of the skeleton way.
Yeah, absolutely. You completely break the posture. And it's all about biomechanics. Your opponent can't throw a punch when their posture's off center, or they can't throw a strong punch. By breaking their structural stability, you take the upper hand, and that requires, I'm going to use the term, and I don't mean it in a male sense, that requires balls. That requires you to jump in and get in there. You have to move in a controlled, defined fashion using your thighs, your calves, and your hips to generate your power, not letting your body lag behind and being directly involved in the attack, and getting straight in there. You have to decide to end it. And
yeah,
again,
it's a very assertive mindset. It's not a passive one.
Aikido should not have the passive mindset, and unfortunately it does. But if you ever watch some of the good footage of O-Sensei back in his day, he was never holding back. As an older man, yes, of course he is, because he's older. His body's not moving the same. And the students were respecting him, if you know what I mean. And the same thing happens in a lot of the, you see it in a lot of the courses. If you look at any of the Aikikai courses online, oh, God, they're dire. I mean, what you see is demonstration Aikido is pretty poor as far as I'm concerned. It's all just people. You can show respect to an instructor, right? My instructor trained with Chiba. If anyone tried to dance around Chiba, I would have punched him in the face. Do you know what I mean? Because back in his younger days, he just didn't tolerate it. It was an insult to do that to someone of that stature. But nowadays it all seems to be people just prancing about around each other out of respect for not, I don't want to get in your personal space, Sensei. I don't want to hurt you, Sensei. You're not going to hurt me. You're not going to get in my personal space. You're offending me by not attacking properly, because I am offended that you don't think I can cope with it. And that's the regime I was brought up in, particularly in the karate, and in judo especially. Could you imagine judo if everyone respected their personal space and didn't try any throw it? It doesn't work. It's just stupid. And this is what happens, and this is where some of the more kind of modernist other martial arts, things like BJJ, come in quite nicely, because you're always in their personal space. If we can look at why those types of things not just are popular, but why they work, it's because those guys are in permanent irime mode. They are doing irime all the time, straight in. Everyone's in each other's faces, and that's what you're wanting. Now, again, people don't come to Aikido to learn martial arts all the time. Some people just want to come to learn something. Some people come for a social side. That's fine, as long as you are open and upfront about the way you want to train. If you want to train from a perspective where I just want to learn a technical martial art, I don't like violence, I just like doing the motions, that's fine. Train at that level. I will never force training on anyone that doesn't want to train with a certain level of intensity or focus. That's not correct. And if people come in and I've got a couple of guys like that. They're technically superb. They're first dans, second dans in every aspect of the world, technically superb. But when the brown stuff started hitting the whirly thing out in the real world, I would be the first person to push them into a taxi and just tell them to go home, because what they do will have no applicability whatsoever to the world round about them. Right. But they are technically excellent.
One thing is you talked about the intercepting part, and I think that this plays into that mindset, which is the intercepting. Bruce Lee named his Jeet Kune Do the way of the intercepting fist. And as I understand it, when he created Junfan Kung Fu, he admitted that it was a pretty intricate style that took a lot of high technical ability kind of art. It took a long time to train it. His goal with Jeet Kune Do was to condense it, to make it more direct and easier to learn for people that didn't want to have to train 10 years to get art. He wanted something that was direct. And the more you see a principle echoed in other areas, to me, the more universal it is. And the idea of interception, or intercepting something before it comes to you, I think is a solid, it's in every strategy. It's in all military strategy. You don't want to wait for a big problem and then try to deal with it. You want to catch it early and intercept. And I think, a lot of people look at Bruce Lee and how fast he was. They say, well, yeah, but he was so fast, he could intercept everything. But when you take a step back and you look at violence starting to form and you intercede early, it's easier to solve that problem than waiting until it's, the boulder's already rolling down the hill over your head.
That's a philosophy for life right there.
Yes.
When you see a problem, catch it early. Do you know, that's life. That's just, we have literally just sorted life. Take note, everyone, we've sorted your life. If you see a problem,
that's right. You heard it here first.
Not get any worse. You know, deal with it. So yeah, but that's it. That's what the martial arts are about. It's about recognizing threat, problems, moving in to meet them, and resolving them.
Right.
You know, and that's when Aikido lends itself particularly well, because, but only if it's actually taught in that manner.
Yeah, and I think that doing it in the most elegant and efficient manner is the beauty of Aikido. You are not just using maximum firepower and the heaviest, using maximum violence to achieve that end. You're using, you know, maximum efficiency. And I really like Judo's mantra of, what was it? Minimal effort for maximum effect, or something of that nature. I adore that, and I really think that fits Aikido as well. Like we don't want it to be more intricate, more athletic, using energy you don't need or wasting it. It should be elegant and direct, and end the violence as quickly as possible. I guess that's just my opinion, that we all have opinions of how Aikido should work, but I think ultimately that is the beautiful strategy of, no matter what problem you solve, why spend more money on it than you need to, or spend more time on it than you need to, or have it go longer. Get it done quick, as efficiently, and move on.
And there are schools and dojo out there that do what is effectively, it's basically, you know, Aiki yoga. You know, what the style they teach is very soft. The style that they do is very soft. There is no focus or intent on dealing with attacking. It's all to do with body movement and, you know, perhaps a bit of conditioning, perhaps a bit of exercise, all of that kind of thing. You know, again, I have no issues at all with all of that, provided that they are explicitly identifying that's what they do, that what they're doing is a technical martial art only. You know, and it's and this is where, unfortunately, with the world around us, and with the you know, the rise of YouTube and video coverage of stuff online, people now only believe. I mean, I know lots of folk who query me about Aikido. Why do you like this so much? What does it give you? And I tell them, Aikido gives me everything I put into it. That's what it gives me. It gives me everything I put into it and 100% more back. You know, because that's how I like to train. But not everybody likes to train that way. So but unfortunately, with the kind of, you know, a lot of what you see out there now is pretty bad. And it's not bad it's bad in terms of how it's presented, not what they're doing. Oh, don't get me wrong, some of it is bad. Yeah, actually, no, I take it.
Indeed, both of those are problems.
I cannot begin to tell you what some of it is, because I'm being polite at the moment. But some of it is atrocious. And some of it is just like, what, you know, WTF? What is that? And then what really annoys me is, but we all get tarred with that same brush. And there are a lot of guys out there in the world trying to do the best they can to redress this balance. Yourself, you know, being one of them. Lots of people out there. And what is also annoying for me is Aikido bashing now seems to be the popular thing to do. You know,
that's true.
I was chatting with someone the other day via email, and they said they're pretty sure that's a remit for some BJJ schools to get your blue belt. You have to show that you've at least gone on to 5 forums and bashed some Aikido people about how it doesn't work in the street. And that's terrible. I'm not picking on BJJ for doing that. That was just part of a conversation. But and now it's all coming round. I mean, there's now even crazy claims. You know, you were mentioning Bruce Lee a wee while back. It's like folk are saying, oh, he was a fake because there's no videos of him. I'm like, yeah, but there were no videos. People didn't video people back then. You know, there were no video phones. Right. The video does not make reality. And this is one of the other things that gets us back into this unsolvable problem. People are wanting to see Aikido in reality in a video, when what's probably, as you put earlier with the guy going through his training that went through someone, you wouldn't recognize that as Aikido. You might, I might.
Right.
We might see a Tenchinage, but if you played that video back to someone, they wouldn't recognize that as Aikido, but we do.
Right.
And so the ignorance isn't necessarily to do with the fact that the art doesn't work. A lot of it's ignorance in the eyes of the beholder, that what they're seeing, they don't understand the principles of what they're seeing. And Aikido is a set of solid principles and foundation principles about how to move your body and how to focus your mind and focus your attitude into maximum effort for minimum effect, just as you said. Yeah. And they won't see that. All they want to see is flashy Tekken style moves. Right. You know, Nina Williams tying guys up in knots on the ground and snapping their arm like a twig. Doesn't
That's where they can go watch a John Wick movie and see all of that.
Absolutely. Until they get up off
martial
the ground.
art violence porn, really.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's they want to be entertained. Until you do that and get up off the ground and you realize that you fought in an alleyway and there's now a syringe in your neck.
Well, maybe that'll be our next episode, is the unsolvable marketing problem of Aikido.
The unsolvable marketing problem. That's the
one. That's right.
Education's a big thing, I think. You know, a lot of this, but it's also, it's now, I say it's sad it's now become fashionable to lambast it and laugh at it. But don't get me wrong.
And to be fair, Aikido does have its share of clowns and charlatans.
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, a lot of it out there is pretty poor.
You know, and a lot of arts have them. You know, we're certainly not the only one, and that's kind of why I like having these conversations, because I want to. This is not an entertainment show. This is an education show for people that are that want to get into improving their art, expanding their horizons for how to do it. And you know, I love that we covered sort of how to look at this. And there was one question that I had that I wanted to do before we wrap up, and that is for people that think, okay, to train for realism, I need to do a percentage of my training or my classes as combatives, and maybe do I need to turn 100% of my class or of my curriculum into some sort of combatives? And what I want to share with people is that, firstly, no, you don't. When I started out, I chose maybe like 10-20% maybe, where I worked in some of the combative stuff that I had learned. As I started doing that more than 10-12 years ago, what I noticed was, even though that's only a small portion of the curriculum, because we do Tenkan steps and Taino Henko and all of this that stuff, as you do it, what you learn within that combative side starts to creep into everything you do, and it starts honing your Aikido and making everything you do more efficient, more effective, more applicable to real situations. It's less dojo sterile and more practical, and it's a process. It's not I just need to find this magical way of doing this technique that I haven't learned before. It's a process, and it will always be going on. It's still going on. I'm thrilled to keep learning and finding out more about how practical application is affecting and improving my Aikido. It's helping me make it more efficient, where making smarter decisions are just habit. I still strive for that efficiency, maximum efficiency with the least amount of risk. I really don't want to get hit at all, and I want to improve my odds of not getting hit while being able to intercede and end violence against me. All of that stuff works together. It's not like we need to throw some combatives into our curriculum. It will actually start to improve everything across the board. That's my experience. With bringing stuff like that in. And I do get people's hesitance, like, oh my God, if I bring in this more real world stuff, is it going to destroy the beauty of Aikido? I don't think it will. I think the aesthetic will change a little bit, but the fact that it is practical and reliable will make it a much stronger art that people will love even more. The practitioners will trust it and adore it, and not have that lingering doubt question of, well, would this actually work, or have them say outright, no, it won't work, and have that trust issue with their own art. It breaks my heart to see Aikidoists who love the art say, well, yeah, but it's useless. Like, how can you?
That whole useless thing, that useless thing, that's like saying that's such generic labeling. And we all know in the real world, you cannot place a generic label on anything. You know, you know, that's like if you know someone whose husband cheated on their wife, you know, all men are cheaters. Do you know, it's not true. Do you know what I mean? Right. It's like, no, and just because,
or the institution of marriage is destructive or
it's destructive,
or
it never works. You know, it's generic labeling doesn't work. So for someone to say that Aikido is useless is ridiculous, because what that shows is a lack of maturity in their understanding of their own statements. Because not every situation has a clear outcome. to say that something is useless is like saying, like, I'm pretty sure back in the caveman days they had this discussion about round wheels versus square wheels. Those round wheels roll downhill, they're all useless.
Right.
Yeah, but they go uphill so much better. And it's trying to apply that type of logic across the board. I find it despairing, and I also find it ignorant, because it just shows a complete lack of understanding, not just of what they're talking about, but also a lack of wanting to understand that there could be situations where this stuff is usable. Tonight, we've talked about a ton of situations where what you learn in an Aikido dojo can be applied. Therefore, to say it's useless is not. If you put yourself into, I'm just trying to think of an example. If I threw myself into an MMA fight without training for it for 4 months, 5 months in advance, and tried to apply Ikkyo or Kotegaeshi to somebody wearing MMA gloves, who's trying to bash my face off the canvas, that would be useless. But the body movement wouldn't be. I could still apply my body movement to that, but to just jump in there and try and do something like that, that's ridiculous. That's not saying that your martial art is useless. That's saying that you've put yourself in a ridiculous situation, for example, And there seems to be this need for Aikido to try to prove itself by engaging with that particular environment, and I've noticed a rise in that recently. Someone said that to me.
I guess it would be, trying to evaluate the usefulness of a pickup truck by seeing if it could compete in a NASCAR race.
Exactly. It's the exact same thing. Yeah. Right. And invariably, what we do in Aikido is we look at the whole concept of the art. There's always something from that you can apply to any given situation, whether it's the de-escalation techniques, whether it's the body movement, like my student did at the bus stop. He hadn't had a lot of training. He'd only been training for about a year, but he was still able to keep his mind, applying those Kokyu breathing principles to keep your mind clear so that you don't make stupid mistakes. That's not useless. The technical martial arts stuff, you can't apply that into a given situation. If I brought an example up once with someone, is that I can do all the Aikido I want, but if I go into a boxing ring and I've got 14-ounce gloves on my hands, I can't do any of my techniques with my hands covered with boxing gloves, So I'm going to get beat. That doesn't mean that what I learn is useless. It just means in that situation that I have placed myself, what I'm trying to do is not applicable.
Right.
So I failed my art by not adapting to the new environment. Whereas what I should have done was go in with my Aikido principles and adapted the new boxing style. I didn't do that in that circumstance. This hasn't happened. This is what I was saying to someone. I would not have done that. Therefore, that would have been a problem. Therefore, it was my interpretation of what I needed to do that was useless, not the art itself. Right. There's always something we can take from it. But it's really important that we understand and I keep hitting home with this, technical Aikido, applied Aikido, and even, kata style based Aikido. There's so many different variances of how people train. To label an art as useless because 1, 2, 3, or 1,000 people online trying to do stuff and it looks ridiculous, you just can't do it. That's like saying all Ford cars are rubbish because you bought one that broke down. It doesn't work that way. Certainly there are a huge amount of people who only train in technical Aikido, and therefore for them to try to apply that technicality in a ring scenario or a combative or a contested scenario, it's not going to work. They would need to go away, rethink what they do, ask themselves why they're doing that in the first place, and then go back and change it. And then make their changes based on that. And it's, I've had guys, I've got a couple of students that have gone on to do other martial arts. They've gone into BJJ after Aikido. Because I'd said to them, do you do anything else? No, well, you might want to do something else because I'm pretty sure you're looking for a complete martial art. There's no such thing. There are gaps in Aikido. If you want to do groundwork, go and do BJJ, but train here at the same time. Bring some of it in. Let me see it. Let's see what we can use. We can bring it into jiyu-waza training, for example.
Well, and I like how you split up the technical and the applied. One thing to consider, because I know there's a lot of people in Aikido that just love the technical stuff and that they adore it. They have fun training it, which is cool, but they often think that the training, the applied stuff is not fun. And it really is. In fact, I think it's a lot more fun than training the technical, which I like focusing on the technical, because when I used to compete, the better technical fighter would often have an advantage. The one who was sloppy and their technique was not very good would struggle. So as you want to succeed, improving your technical ability is part of the formula. But it's not you can't just train in technical and like you said earlier and expect to succeed. But the intangible stuff that you use to kind of glue all of the technique and the movement and strategy, all that together, developing that and working and training and improving it is tremendously fun. I have a great time. Oh, I mean, and some people might think, well, it's very frustrating. In fact, I feel like technical work is more frustrating because you have that really hair splitting. No, you have to be exactly in this position. You have to move exactly this way. To me, that's a bit more frustrating than the working on that application part. That's where the fun really starts to happen.
I had an experience as a second Dan where we were doing basic with a gentleman coming up for a course, and we're doing basic cuts with the Bokken. And do you remember the original Conan the Barbarian, where he's learning to cut with a sword, and the wee Japanese man comes up and goes, and he moves his sword like that?
Oh, sure.
That's what this guy did with me.
Okay.
And he's like, oh, not there. And I was like, what, there or there? And he went, no, there. And I kept that going, there, no, there, oh, there, oh, no, there. And I was like, all right, sorry, I missed the minutiae of that 2 millimeters of difference. Do you know what I mean? And it was like, oh dear God, it was the most boring course. 2 days, one full day on. Had I known this, I would never have let him near us. 1 full day of show minucci.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, I was going crazy at the end of it. My spine was killing me. My lower back was killing me because we'd just been standing. And I change all our postures, and it was this whole left foot, right angled posture. You know the thing that one of the parts that grinds my gears just briefly is the people that don't understand that the weapons training in Aikido should complement the bodywork. And they look at the weapons training as though it's a form of weapon, it's a weapon style in itself, and it's not. So they hold their body in a completely different position from what they do when they're actually doing their body movement. This was one of these guys, and it was just nothing matched, but it was all very technical, and it was the most boring thing ever. But that was his bag. That's what he did. And what I find is people who, and I'm probably going to upset a lot of people saying this, and I don't care, I'll be honest. A lot of people like the technical aspect because it strokes the ego quite a bit. There's at no point do you ever feel as though you're defeated or you could have done better when you only do technical training. And that's why I do like a certain element of the competitive aspect, and I also like a certain element of the resisted aspect, because if you only do technical training, that means your partner is only moving in a certain way, and everything's nice, and it's in its cabinets, its little filing cabinets, and everything's precise, and the world is perfect and as it should be. Now, I've got a couple of students over the years who have had autistic spectrum disorder, and they only really respond to technical training. One was quite far into the spectrum. That's an entirely different state of affairs. I respected that, and he only ever trained with someone, and whoever trained with him, I told them, this guy doesn't make sure everything's exactly where it needs to be, because otherwise he's going to tell you, no, your hand shouldn't be there, it should be here. That was a completely different scenario. That was someone who had a genuine medical condition, and we respected that, and we worked with him, and he trained with us for about 8-9 years before he moved away, and he was great. But at the end of the day, a lot of people like it because it's safe, and they don't feel as though there's any threat to their ego, and they can feel good about themselves without the threat of having to stop and look and go, I'm really bad at this. A lot of people
kind of look at it like the throwing the baby out with the bathwater, with the bathwater being the failure, the stuff that's unpleasant. You don't like that part, but there's no joy like seeing you put together your technical stuff, the strategy stuff, the smart decisions, the application, and then having it work, having you succeed. Like that is a sublime joy. And to me, that's the joy part of training. And when you train, it's not like you're just getting beaten up for, an hour and a half at a time. You should be tasting, okay, here's stuff that I get to work. Here's stuff where I struggle. And then you keep improving yourself so you're getting those wins, those successes. Like that's to me, the joy of training. And to give that up just to get to technical, where all you're really looking at is praise from your instructor, because that's the only feedback you get is your instructor says, yes, you did this well, very good.
And I've found, Tristan, as well personally, that also it's not just, see, once they get to a certain level, it's that they stop looking at it from the instructor and start looking at it from their peers. And that's why they don't step out of that environment. That's such and such. They do really good technical training. For them to then step down off that pedestal and put themselves into situations where they're going to be really bad for a couple of years, sometimes it's too big an ego drop. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to be seen as that. Now, me, personally, I don't mind that. I don't mind going right back to grassroots and starting again. And that's what I've been doing with the applied stuff, is I've stopped and taken a look at it and thought, right, how can we make Aikido even better? By preserving the traditions, by preserving the technical work, by preserving the kata work, by preserving the partner work, by adding in the thing that is missing. And it's only missing because I believe when the majority of people came to train with O-Sensei, he didn't need to do this stuff because they all were accomplished black belts. He didn't have to show these guys how to do punches and kicks and grapples and chokes and locks because they knew it already. What he was.
They probably had a great deal of the Budo spirit, the martial spirit.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, absolutely. They would have carried all this in with them. So they didn't need to be trained up in all that and to be directed and focused and to understand what happened. These guys a lot of the guys he trained with were hardcore. They were pretty hard people back in the day, back in the early formation days. So, he had to step up to the plate. What he was teaching was concepts that take out the death and destruction part of it and introduce something that allows for a more fluid and more dynamic scenario, based on the techniques that O-Sensei learned. That's the way I always see Aikido. It was never designed to be this passive, mousy, almost kind of like, I'm going to use the term sympathetic art. I don't think it was ever designed to be this. But
I don't think so either.
It's lost its way. It's lost its way. And as O-Sensei aged, his techniques developed and changed. And everyone that trained with him, they went off and assumed that that's all there was. What I've been shown is what I'm going to take off and do. And that's how we've now got, all these different styles of Aikido. We've got all these different styles and formations because they're only representations of O-Sensei's journey from the early days in the 30s through to him passing away in the late 60s. That's only an interpretation of his journey. It's nothing to do with the training aspect. So in order to understand the true message of Aikido, look at all the styles like loose threads and pull them together, and then maybe you'll understand what O-Sensei was working from all those years to try and make a picture. It's like a jigsaw. Iwama style gives you a bit of that. Ki style gives you a little bit of that. Traditional Aikikai style gives you a little bit of that. A little bit of hardness. Let's take Shioda. Bang, plant him in there. That's what it looked like back then. Let's look at the Ushibaha Aikibujutsu. Bang, that's what that looked like. Plug that in. What was this individual's vision going forward? And how did it structure itself? And cut through all the myth and legend that a lot of authors have written about him over the years and just look at him as a human being. There's too many people get caught up in all this weird mysticism around Aikido and O-Sensei dodging bullets like Leroy Green in The Last Dragon. Do you know what I mean?
Well, and that's why I wanted to have this discussion about, how do we look at our training and not have to demand that it be the ultimate reality, but we have, I think, segmenting it into the components or the traits that you want to develop in a superb martial artist and train them that way and then start to combine them. I think we've had a really great discussion, Stephen, but I'll let you, if you have any thoughts you want to wrap up on, we can kind of do that. And, I know we've had over, I think, hour 40 minutes. We've been really
wow,
cruising
really?
here, so, yeah, time flies.
Sorry, everyone. As I say to my psychologist, it's not getting me to start talking, it's getting me to shut up. It's the problem. I think it's we've had a great discussion, Tristan. Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome.
I hope what we say, what we've gone over, people don't take too much offense to it, but it maybe makes them think a little bit about things. Is that Aikido, I think, is one of the best martial arts out there. It's not perfect. It has gaps, but it teaches us all the principles that we need to be effective human beings and not just effective martial artists. And it teaches us a lot of great principles and methods for learning to control ourselves. I always tell my students, you can't control your opponent until you learn to control yourself. And that's the fundamental aspect of Aikido and what it means. In this world, as we're coming out of the pandemic and COVID, and everyone's feeling a little bit lost and a little bit kind of out of sorts and not in touch with what's going on. If they haven't tried Aikido, find yourself a really good club, get involved, go along, because this world needs Aikido and the style of training and message that it produces. Aikido is not just an effective martial art on its own, it can also enhance your other martial training by introducing new principles, new techniques, new philosophy, new thought, and make you look at yourself in a different way. That's the thing that I take most from Aikido. It's not about being the perfect martial artist, it's about being a better human being. And let's face it, this world could do with a few more better human beings now.
Absolutely. That's a well said. Great point to wrap this up on. So thank you very much again, Stephen, for coming on. This is probably one of my favorite discussions of all that I've had on the show. So look forward to having you back again.
Yeah, anytime at all. It's been an honor and a privilege. Thank you.
Will do. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Stay tuned for more episodes. I've got some great stuff on the way very soon. In the meantime, enjoy your training.